I'm Leanna, and today we will be discussing the article The Power of Queer. Let's see where the title. There it is. Okay, here's our think, pair, share for the article. Our qualitative questions are: in what ways do same-sex and different-sex parents differ in the concept of doing gender when it comes to housework and childcare? What does the heteronormative view of family mean for a heterosexual couple compared to what it means for LGBTQ couples? How is queer mothering defined, and what does it mean to accept this definition of queer motherhood? What are some of the challenges LGBTQ parents face when starting a family, and what does this mean for their family structure? If society began to accept and adapt to homonormativity, what would it look like for same-sex couples? How does the masculine appearance paired with mothering behaviors challenge the natural correlation of reproduction and mothering? When identifying as a guy mom and single mother, how can your social position affect you? What does it mean to have a male role model, and what are society's concerns for children growing up in a same-sex family? And last, does research suggest that viewing a different model other than heterosexual relationships during childhood have an enduring effect? In today's lecture, we will be exploring what it means to be a guy mom. We will also be discussing gender as being socially constructed rather than being biologically determined, like most of us may assume it is. And we will hopefully gain a better understanding of LGBTQ parents and reconsider the notions of mothering. I thought it was important to note that the author of this article is a sociologist who studies gender and inequality. He is also a mother, a single parent, a butch lesbian, and a trans man identified person. The picture I have here on the right is a picture of a male couple, and one is a trans man, and that is how he is pregnant, and we will talk more about that later in the lecture. Into same-sex parents and heterosexual parents doing gender. So when the author speaks about doing gender, what he is referring to is the gender that children are taught and that is learned and relearned over time and throughout social situations in their life. And whether we believe it or not or realize it, tasks are mostly associated within the family and within housework with what gender you have. And this is what makes family a very important site to create both gender and gender inequality knowledge. I think it's important to note that according to the studies done in this article, lesbian parents tend to have an equal distribution of housework and childcare, more than meaning they have a better distribution than heterosexual parents tend to have. When it comes to heterosexual couples, the mother tends to take on more of the childcare and housework even when she is working full time. Both same-sex and different-sex couples, the parent who made more money was less likely to engage in housework. So that is one thing that they had more in common. This article also shows the unequal division of labor in families is more so based on the power inequities between the primary earner and the primary parent rather than being based on gender. Okay. So what we have on this slide is some visual examples to further explain the unequal division of housework. If you look at the chart on the bottom left, it is a chart showing that women continue to take on most of the housework and childcare during the lockdown, which I found to be interesting because, as we know, many men and women were out of work for quite some time. But if we look at the chart, it reads that when it came to laundering, 69% of women were taking care of the laundry, while only 30% of the men were taking care of it. And when it came to homework or helping the children with homework, 62% of women reported taking care of that, while only 38% of men reported to it. And cooking, 59% of women were taking care of cooking, while only 40% of men were doing that. Moving on to cleaning, 64% of women were doing the cleaning, while only 35% reported to do cleaning. And moving on to leisure or spending more time with the children, Again, 55% women were doing it, and only 45% of the men were doing that. This last one here says shopping, which I found to be interesting. It was the only area where more men reported to do more of that at 54%, and only 46% of women reported to do more shopping. And the middle picture is a visual representation of what it might look like for a mother who is working full-time and continuing to take on majority of the housework and the child care. And in the last chart in the bottom right, it shows that gay couples are the happiest with how their household work is divided up between the two of them. If we look at the first section, it says household responsibilities. Men in different sex couples were 4.02 satisfied with it. Men in same-sex couples were 4.18. Women in different sex couples 3.82, and women in same-sex couples 3.99. The next section is childcare responsibilities. Men in different sex couples came in at 4.15. Men in same-sex couples came in at 4.37. Women in different sex couples 3.77, and women in same-sex couples 4.15. And let's keep in mind this is out of a scale of 5. So I also found it interesting that men in different sex couples were more satisfied in the housework and in the childcare work than the women in different sex couples were, which is not surprising because, as we learned by now, more women are taking on that kind of work in heterosexual couples. And as the title shows, these numbers also further support that gay couples are more happy because they divide work more evenly. Going into heteronormative views of family life. So heteronormativity is the assumption that heterosexuality is the norm, the normal sexual orientation, and the normal relationship that we should see between people. Heteronormativity outlines the behaviors that we expect to see in a male and in a female, and it also plays a part in organizing the social, political, and economic structures. Heteronormative views have women today who are working full-time coming home and taking on the second shift. When we talk about second shift, what we mean is, as I mentioned earlier, when a woman works full-time, comes home, and puts in extra late hours to tend to the housework and tend to the child care. Heteronormativity can also penalize the LGBTQ families by denying their existence on school forms, medical forms, and many other official forms. Heteronormativity can also exclude the LGBTQ community from everyday activities and can deny them legal rights. An unfortunate example of this happening is with a woman named Lisa Pond. So Lisa Pond collapsed from an aneurysm while on vacation in Florida with her family, and even with legal documents such as adoption papers and her healthcare proxy papers, her partner Janice of 18 years and their 3 children were denied the right to see her in her last few dying hours because the social worker clearly stated, "This is an anti-gay city and an anti-gay state. You will not be able to see her or know her condition." So unfortunately, that resulted in her children and her partner being able to see her very little to none in her last few hours, which is very sad, and also only one example of the way that LGBTQ families can be treated at times because of these heteronormative views. Moving on to queering family and motherhood. So as of now, queering is whatever is at odds with the normal or the legitimate or the dominant, meaning that queering motherhood is described as an act that is transgressive and, as I mentioned before, not the norm. If we continue to define queering or queering motherhood as such, then that means that not only same-sex and trans people are a queer family, it also means that single motherhood, mothering in transracial families, the mother as a primary earner, and many other forms of mothering would also be considered queer because they are going against the odds. The danger of defining queer as this is also that it removes the notion of queering motherhood from the realm of sexual orientation and gender identity. Um, because queering family challenges the dominant heteronormative views, a relatively conservative act like enrolling your child in a patriarchal school um, can disrupt society or the school. And an example of that would be an 8-year-old boy who was rejected from Catholic school, and also children of same-sex parents having to negotiate when applying for FAFSA. So to go more into depth, what happened there was an 8-year-old boy was rejected from a Catholic elementary school in 2010 because of his lesbian mothers, and the Archdiocese of Boston actually ended up clarifying policy because of this. In response to the public outcry, the Archdiocese's new admissions policy stated that the Boston's parochial school was no longer allowed to discriminate against or exclude any categories of families. And that's just one example of how LGBTQ families can lead to social change. Another example is that children of same-sex couples who are applying for college have had to negotiate their FAFSA application because up until recently the application was bound by the language of the Federal Defense of the Marriage Act, defining marriage between a man and a woman. So as you can imagine, that made it difficult for children applying for FAFSA of same-sex couples to be accepted and to explain their situation. But in those cases, policy has changed because of the effects it has on LGBTQ families. Discussing the queering family structure. So the queer family structure often challenges the nuclear normative family model because of the biological factors. One thing that queer families often have to face and that heterosexual parents and families do not have to face is deciding when and where they want to disclose the information of their child's conception or how they created a family, because with same-sex families, they're often called upon by family members, friends, even strangers to explain how their family was created, whether that be through adoption, a sperm donor, an egg donor, a surrogate mother, things like that. And usually that is a topic that is more intimate and personal. But as I mentioned, unfortunately, when you're in a same-sex family, you are questioned about that topic often and more likely than not feel pressured into answering to sometimes even strangers as to how you created a family, which in heterosexual families that is typically something that you can keep to yourself. Um, Same-sex couples also illustrate the different possibilities there are for family structure beyond what the norm is or what society is used to of the nuclear family. An example of this is that sometimes same-sex parents have a donor dad who remains in contact and remains close to the family and to the child and remains in the family's life, just not as a romantically involved member or partner of the family. And another another family other ways of creating their family structure, as mentioned before, is by egg donation or sperm donation. Some lesbian couples choose to have one partner donate the egg and the other partner give birth. And when we're talking about this topic, it brings up the question of realness: who is the real mother, who is not the real mother. When it comes to adoption, usually they will consider the biological mom to be the real mother, but when it comes to a situation of donating the egg and the other partner giving birth, it's a little bit it's a little bit less certain of who is the real mom. Another issue that queer families face is that their family does not usually fit onto forms, um, or fit into social institutions, because the boxes right now are only made to cater to heterosexual families and not queer families. Here we just have some visual representations of some of the possibilities of queer family structures. In the left-hand side, you will see a gay couple. One is a trans man who is pregnant. That is one thing that you may see when a queer family is, when a queer couple is creating a family. In the middle, we see two mothers, lesbian mothers and their child. And in the third picture, we see two gay men and their child. As I mentioned, these are just possibilities of queer family structures, and it is not limited to only these types of families. Going into homonormativity, is this the new normal? So as gay and lesbian people gain social acceptance, this increases their pressure to assimilate to heteronormative practices. So what homonormativity is referring to is society beginning to accept gays and lesbians based on their ability to express heterosexual values and behaviors. Um, if this is becoming the new normal, that means that society is still determining who is acceptable and unacceptable according to their sexual orientation and their gender identity. What homonormativity also means is that the closer a couple or family is to a heteronormative family, the more valuable and less sanctioned they are considered. An example of this is gay men who are not feminine and lesbian mothers who are not masculine. Here we have some examples of what would be acceptable if homonormativity were to become the new normal. On the left, we have lesbian mothers with their daughter who appear to still be feminine. And on the next picture, we have two gay men with their children who also appear to maintain their masculinity while being gay. These couples would be acceptable because they fit closer to the heteronormative family view. Now discussing the transgressive mothering. So the author of this article identifies as a trans man and a guy mom. He also mentions that simply by being a mother as a masculine female, he often finds himself disrupting the sex and gender binary. An example he gives of this is walking into a mother-dominated PTA meeting with a tray full of brownies. Another is when going to the bathroom, he is having to explain that he is in the correct space. These actions disrupt the masculinity and femininity because although he appears masculine, he is existing in spaces that are predominantly filled with women. And although he does not look feminine, he is taking part in events or activities that are more likely known to be women's work. His inability to conform to the gender binary creates the constant gender trouble for the individuals that are around him and that he is interacting with on a day-to-day basis. Gay men often face this same situation because just their presence as a father or their presence in parenting challenges the heterosexual beliefs and views. An example of this is when we think of the phrase fathering a child. Usually that would mean the father of the child and all the actions and work that come into that. But with often gay men are taking on the position of a father and as a mother. So many gay men believe themselves to be a father and a mother, so they don't always necessarily feel that they are fathering a child, and that alone in itself again is disrupting the notions of masculinity. So when discussing guy moms, gender, and single motherhood, we're focusing on what that means for social status or what social position that puts you in, because gender is actually a crucial aspect of the various social positions that people hold. Because mothers and single mothers are a specific social position and social location, these words evoke particular behaviors in families as well as interactions with different social institutions. This is because the social position of single mother is, of course, gendered, and it doesn't only affect individuals because they are feminine or because they are women, but because there are gender differences in when it comes to power and resources. So in this article, the mother discusses being a guy mom and being a single mother and what that means for the social position, because yes, as mentioned before, the author is a trans man and identifies as a male, but also identifies as a mother, or if you will, a guy mom. And as we talked about in the previous slide, he participates in activities or actions that are typically done by women, but is still a man and identifying as a man and taking on this role of a mother and a single mother. So this is ultimately the definition of what a queer mother would look like, or what queer mothering is. Let's discuss this fixation on the necessity of male and female role models. Many people believe that male and female role models are necessary to socialize their children into a gender. But this fixation on the male role model seems to claim that um, any male figure or role model is better than none at all. But is this true? Um, One fear that is raised by people is that boys without a male figure will not grow into real men. But looking at research and the evidence, it suggests that boys raised by lesbian mothers actually tend to grow into more empathetic men and value egalitarian relationships more than men who were raised by other types of families or by mostly heterosexual families. And that raises the question, are empathy and valuing egalitarian relationships strengths? And if they are, then why aren't we asking the question, how do you get there? What is taking place in the home? What parenting styles are being practiced for a boy to grow into this type of man, rather than only focusing on um, the idea that boys will not become real men. Um, this concern that children need a male and female role models also implies that children cannot or will not make meaningful relationships outside of their homes. But this is often not true, because children are also able or tend to make relationships with other female and male adults through their involvement in school and community activities and other community things throughout their life. Here we have some visual representations of concerns parents may have for their children, or of children growing up without appropriate male and female role models. Some parents believe that the behavior that children observe can strongly influence their future behavior and their future development. They're also concerned that children growing up in same-sex families puts their femininity or their masculinity at risk. Here in the top left picture, these are two young girls who are playing football and are doing something that is known to be more masculine. In the next picture, we have a young boy who is painting his nails. And in the bottom picture, we also have a boy who is dressed up in princess clothes. And these two things are also known to be a more feminine thing. And in the last picture, we have another young girl who is doing something known to be more masculine, dressed up more masculine, and playing with a soccer ball. But when we look at it from a child development perspective, children playing certain things or dressing certain ways at a young age, it doesn't always indicate what they will act like in the future. Sometimes it's just play, but as I mentioned before, these are just some visual representations of what people are concerned young boys and girls will look like when being raised by same sex families or when their masculinity and femininity is at risk. Moving into the lie of gender differentiation. So, in this subject, there was a study found that men who had working mothers in their early childhood years as adults spent more time on housework relative to other men who did not have their mother working in their early childhood years. This just goes to show that you can be taught as a man to take on more housework or to have more egalitarian relationships. Um, a child who is exposed to the decoupling of masculinity and femininity could result in adults that are more diverse um, and have a more diverse set of behaviors and interests. An example that the author gives in this is of her preschool daughter who attempted to describe gender complexities when it came to flip flops. So her mom one day slipped on her sister's very feminine, flowery flip flops and was walking around in them. And her preschool daughter pointed out, "Oh, look, mommy is a drag queen today." And this shows that even at that very young age, her preschool daughter knew that one, her mother identified as a man and that her mother is a man, not a woman. So using that knowledge, seeing her mother in a very feminine type of attire, um, identified her mom as a drag queen. That just goes to show that when you expose children to gender identity and sexual orientations and things like that, they can become knowledgeable and they can learn how to differentiate between these. So this consistent exposure to sex and gender may leave her and other children who are exposed to it in early years and throughout childhood with a less gendered framework than other girls who are raised in heteronormative families. Studies also show that men and women who grow up with gay and lesbian parents tend to be more diverse. They tend to be less gender typical, which they attribute to their upbringing. Moving into our quiz questions. When discussing doing gender, what couples usually have the most even distribution of household tasks? The answer is B, lesbian couples. How can heteronormative views penalize LGBTQ families? That is A, denying their existence on school, medical, official forms, and legal rights. Question 3. What does it mean to accept the current definition of queer motherhood? Answer is D. That it removes the notion of queering motherhood from the realm of sexual orientation and gender identity. Which of these are not a challenge LGBTQ parents face trying to start a family? B. LGBTQ parents have to adopt when starting a family. Number 5. Which statement is true about homonormativity? C. The closer a couple or family resembles a heteronormative family, the more valuable and less sanctioned they are. How does the masculine appearance paired with motherhood and vice versa challenge the natural correlation between reproduction and mothering or fathering? D. All of the above. How does social positions affect single mothers? A. The gendered social position of single mother affects individuals not because they are feminine or identify as women, but because they are gender differences in access to power and resources. Evidence suggests that boys raised by lesbian couples grow up to be more empathetic and value egalitarian relationships. True. Last question. What is one enduring effect on a child who grows up in a same sex family? And the answer is D, which is both B and C. Here is your activity for the week. You're going to watch this TED Talk. It is about a lesbian mother going through the adoption process. She discusses what the process was like and the challenges that her and her partner faced while going through the adoption process. After you watch that video, go ahead and answer the few questions that you see on this slide. It will be a short response. It will be a short response answers. After that, you can go ahead and turn it in. And that is the end of the lecture. Have a great day.